Hey, so the last little bit of this Mkushi trip series, I'm going to kind of talk about some of the plants that I collected, both being those in terms of specimens collected and pressed specimens and the like, but then also some of the live things here. And there are two reasons for having collected live material. Ultimately, one of it is horticulture, to see how well these things grow and hopefully be able to cultivate them, introduce them into the greater garden here around the farm, but then also in terms of testing how useful they would be in terms of large scale or wider horticultural adoption. Things like the Chlorophytum here, this little one that I collected with that leaf that grows really close to the ground and had those inflorescence with the large flowers on them. This one really caught my eye. I loved it from the minute that I saw it, and I really wanted to grow it. So I collected a number of specimens, I think about 10 or so plants altogether. It was very widespread, actually, not worrying about it being something that is rare and that I'm going to kill the population in doing so. It was very widespread in the Mafingas. I reached out to a colleague who concentrates on Chlorophytum. She said that she thinks it is what used to be called Anthericum monophyllum, and that has then been sunk under Chlorophytum subpetiolatum, which I know subpetiolatum. It exists here around Lusaka. It's quite different. I could see that in terms of maybe the flower, but the way that these leaves grow and them being pressed to the ground, or at least lying really close to the ground, I just have a hard time merging those two. So I will also make some of this material available to her to study further, and we will see what comes of it. But otherwise, I'm so thrilled to see that it has adapted quite well and is growing quite consistently in here. And I'm hopeful, the true test will be whether or not it survives the dry season and comes up again next year. Another one would be the Aristea abyssinica. The iris family is usually very full of species of horticultural interest and beautiful flowers and the like, and this Aristea doesn't disappoint either. Now, I grabbed two clumps. Again, it was very widespread in the woodlands there. I grabbed two clumps so I'd have a bit of genetic diversity there, and not all of them have, when I divided them up, have been as happy. You can see this one here, by comparison, has these leaves that are drooping. And we'll see if it adapts. It's not looking too bad, but it's not as happy as obviously this guy here, who has the roots that have done much better. So, these ones I'm really much looking forward to seeing how they will do. Aristea abyssinicum is one of the ones that grows. It's an Aristea that grows in slightly drier habitats than most others, as most others will grow in fairly wet dambos. But this one is also a species usually of higher elevation. I think it starts around 1,500 meters and up. And here in Lusaka at 1,300, we'll see how that goes. So this is one that I'm uncertain about, but I'm definitely looking forward to trying and seeing how we can get that one growing. Then as well, something like the Begonia princeae. Now, the pink flowers on this is definitely an attraction, but the foliage and just the stems, if you see those kind of pinky red stems on it, is quite lovely. And then up close, the leaves kind of give a bit of a silvery kind of effect and stuff like that. So Begonia princeae is a very wide spread species. It has a lot of variation in it. So this one here would be quite different from one that would grow at a lower elevation. And again, this came from an elevation fairly high up, about 17 to 1,800 meters. So we'll see how it fares comparatively to others that would be at a lower level, but it's done quite well in its initial adaptation to growing in the pots. And I think it's actually putting on some new flowers, so hopefully we'll see more flowers in the next little while. Invariably, then there are other things that I have collected that I'll have to wait and see what they kind of turn out to. This is that Chlorophytum that I cannot identify. And my idea is actually to grow it out so that I could press it, or potentially even have a live plant that I can send to my colleague who is specialized in Chlorophytum so that we could find out its identity. So that might happen. We'll have to consult with her about sending her live, although dormant material, and we'll see what happens there. Then the other kind of side of the coin for why I collect some live specimens is to see if I can't flower it and then be able to identify it later on. So some of this material I won't keep because it has very little horticultural merit, but I'm more interested in flowering it so that I can identify that. And this usually actually tends to be a lot more specific with orchids. So here is a Eulophia species, just in leaf. And we collected this from the tops of one of the ridges. So this was around 2,200 meters. And my guess is that this is one that flowers in the late dry season, or potentially even early dry season, or middle dry season, sorry about that, because when we came across it, there was no evidence of flower stalks or anything along those lines. And fairly healthy little population, a nice, fairly large mat of it growing over a few square meters, where you could just make out the leaves and see that it was a Eulophia, you know. So hopefully that one will flower sometime later, and I can identify it then and make specimens of it for sharing with another colleague who specializes in orchids. Likewise here, I collected this terrestrial orchid as well at the time. I don't know if one could really make out that flower so much. It's a little bobbing around or anything like that. I'll try and get some close-ups of it actually. But this we came across in riparian forest. It was just the leaf at that moment with what looked like the bud starting to push out. And I was saying, okay, let me just collect one or two, see if they will continue to flower when I get back to Lusaka. And it has now. So it opened up today. I've already actually had a look at it. And this turns out to be Sonorchis debilis, which is a fairly common species. I've come across it in quite a few of my travels in different parts of northeastern Zambia. It has a 5-lobed lip, very small fifth lobes, but they are just visible on this. So just another species that can be added to the list. And likewise, another orchid here, a habenaria that I came across as we were walking out. Now, this one has been open for a few days. I've actually taken a few flowers on here for the specimen. This will be in spirits. I also took some leaf for DNA samples. This turned out to be Habenaria retinervis. Not a species that's exceedingly rare. However, from the literature, this was collected about almost 150 meters higher than what the literature states. So another reason then to be able to collect these and see what they are in the long run is then to be able to get extra information about the different species. So we'd be able to then add an extra bit of height to the elevation of how high up the species then grows. But again, collected in the hill Miombo, and an interesting species, one that I always think kind of looks like little insects and stuff like that, because I'll also share closer video of it. But a nice one nonetheless. We are in the humidity tent. Now this is where I would usually do horticultural cuttings and things like that for some of the indigenous stuff, but then also some of the we produce here at in the nursery. And I put some that we brought back into a little bit higher humidity. So here we have a fern that we collected in a riparian forest zone, literally growing right next to the streams. It did not like the initial transplanting. As you can see, most of these leaves have dried and died off, but it has since put up a new leaf here. This is Blechnum attenuatum. It's my first time coming across it. It was a very lovely little fern with some interesting creeping rhizome. So I figured, let me see if I can't actually grow it. I was quite taken by it. I also collected the spore-bearing fronds of the other type of Blechnum that we have in Zambia, Blechnum tabulari, and have actually sowed some of those spores, and they're just starting to germinate. So I'm quite keen on that. I'm hoping that they will come out very well. But then the other major one in here, now I put in here to keep up the humidity, is the impatient sutherlandii. I've always loved seeing the pictures of sutherlandii. I was always hoping to come across it. So to actually come across it was so lovely. And they've adapted quite well to being in here. And we'll keep them in here for for the foreseeable future. And I will hope that actually they make some seeds, because we can just see here that this guy has got some female flowers that have developed, and I'm hoping we can do some cross-pollination, get them growing, and be able to create some seed effectively. So those I am very keen on. And then lastly, we also had this Liparis orchid. Now the flowers have faded on this one here. I have taken some for specimens, and have been able to ID it when it was just putting up its flower stalk when we were in the Mafingas. Now I can say that we had Liparis bocheri that was growing up there as well. So definitely part of the reasons for having collected some of these things is actually more for being able to document what it is truly, rather than the ornamental possibilities of this, because unfortunately most Liparis orchids are not the most stunning. So these guys will be added to the collection that I have here at the nursery, and grow in pots from now on. These guys don't really survive well in the ground here at the farm, just because they get overgrown by everything else. But they grow quite happily in these little pots. And then I just keep them around for interest's sake, more so after this. So then in terms of the pressed specimens, here I've got two samples of the two different chlorophytums that we came across. This is that one with that single leaf that's pressed to the ground. It's actually come out quite well. The tepals have actually dried quite nicely on it. Quite happy with that. So these I have dried further since we arrived back. I put them onto my drying box. It has 200-watt bulbs at the bottom, creating quite a bit of heat. 100-watt incandescent bulbs, I should say. And that helps to dry the specimens much faster. Otherwise, with this kind of humidity that we have at this time of year, they can take a very long time to dry, and in some cases they'll actually get moldy. But it took about 2 weeks to dry everything down. And then I got to work on identification. I've done that as much as I can. And from here, now I will start to send this material out. So some of the material will stay here in Zambia and go to the forestry herbarium up in Kitwe. Others I will send to Kew. And then if I have triplicates, I will look at another international herbarium that I'll send this stuff to. Hopefully I will be able to get the identifications for those that I've not been able to identify myself. That might take a bit of time, unfortunately, but at least at this point in time, the material will last for a very long time if kept dry. So I'm very happy with how it all went. You know, in total, I collected just over 100 specimens. About 80 to 85 of them are dried herbarium specimens like this. And this is basically the biggest part of the job. And it's sometimes the most time consuming as well. But it is a really enjoyable, it's a great way of taking a snapshot of what is flowering at a point in time in a location and then having that for posterity's sake if it's well looked after. So with that, I'm going to close out these Mafinga videos. I hope you've really enjoyed them. Give me a comment if you feel there's something that I should be doing that I haven't done with this kind of video. Otherwise, stay tuned as I'll have a few more of these on the go soon. Cheers.